Bonjour tout le monde. Anna et moi sommes très heureux d'être ici aux États-Unis pour une tournée afin de promouvoir nos travailleurs et nos intérêts. Le but, c'est d'utiliser le grand levier de bonne volonté qu'on partage avec le peuple américain pour éliminer les tarifs et rétablir le libre-échange entre nos deux pays. Le but, c'est de promouvoir des chèques de paix de Canada. On veut que le Canada soit abordable chez nous, sécuritaire chez nous, maître chez nous. Mon tournée a commencé à Détroit, où j'ai proposé l'idée de libre-échange d'un pacte d'automobiles pour permettre le libre-échange de nos autos à travers nos frontières. Après ça, je suis allé à Houston afin de parler de l'énergie canadienne. Le Texas est l'un des marchés les plus grands pour l'énergie canadienne. J'ai proposé l'augmentation de 2 millions de barils par jour de pétrole afin d'augmenter notre dollar canadien, notre PIB, les revenus pour la santé, l'éducation. Et les gens de Texas étaient très, très heureux d'entendre ce plan. Après ça, je suis allé à Austin, au capital, pour rencontrer le gouverneur Abbott. M. Abbott est un grand supporter de Canada. Il veut en faire davantage de commerce avec notre pays. Le Texas est l'un des plus grands marchés d'exportation au monde pour le Canada. Et il veut un plus grand partenariat avec nous sur l'énergie, la technologie et d'autres industries canadiennes et américaines. Après quoi, j'ai eu l'occasion d'aller aux grandes émissions de Joe Rogan, la plus grande émission de podcast au monde, pour faire les arguments en faveur de l'élimination des tarifs, de libre-échange entre nos deux pays et de rebâtir l'amitié. C'était une occasion exceptionnelle de parler au plus grand nombre d'Américains possible pour contrer les tarifs sur l'aluminium, le bois d'œuvre, l'acier, les automobiles, pour défendre les travailleurs au Canada. Et j'espère que ça va créer plus de leviers avec l'administration pour les négociations qui s'en viennent sur l'échange commercial entre nos deux pays qui vont être tenus pendant l'été. Finalement, je suis à New York avant de rencontrer le secteur financier qui touche tous les autres secteurs. C'est la bourse en arrière moi. Donc, on va parler de notre économie, la capacité de Canada de rendre les États-Unis plus abordables et plus sécuritaires, avec une relation plus intégrale, tout en protégeant notre souveraineté. Ça va être dans un grand discours ce soir. Alors, c'est un grand progrès. Encore, le but ici aux États-Unis, c'est de rendre le Canada plus abordable chez nous, plus sécuritaire chez nous et en fait, maître chez nous. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here now in English. It's great to be in the United States of America. I have been really enjoying the goodwill of Americans. Americans love Canada. That's the great news that I take away from this trip. Incredible goodwill on the south side of the border. They want trade with Canada. They want partnership with Canada. They want friendship with Canada, as we've done for well over 200 years now. And we started in Detroit, where I fought for our auto sector, pushing an auto pact that would allow free trade across our border and will not only protect the jobs that are at risk today, but double our production back to where it was back in 2015. And the auto sector on the American side of the border was very happy because the plan that I put forward actually increases auto production for both Canada and the U.S. Then it was off to Houston, which is one of the great energy capitals of the world. Houston buys literally hundreds of millions of barrels of Canadian oil every single year. They don't buy it, they transport it. Canadian oil goes by pipeline day after day, and I went to some of the terminals where our oil is received, processed, and shipped off to the world. The energy companies there were thrilled to hear my plan to boost production by a couple million barrels, to make our country stronger, make our people better off, and make our dollar more powerful. so life's affordable. I then went on to Austin, where I met with the governor of Texas, Governor Abbott. He wants to build even better trade relationships. Texas is one of the biggest export destinations for Canadian goods, and the Texas governor welcomed the idea of buying even more from Canada to support our economy. Then I was on to the Joe Rogan podcast, which is the biggest podcast in the world and the best place to sell Americans on the idea of tariff-free trade, to fight for our auto workers, our lumber workers, our steel and aluminum workers, and to fight for Canadian interests. We need to harness the goodwill of the American people, and what better place to do it than on the biggest podcast in the world, fighting for Canadian workers. Now on to New York, where I'll be speaking to the financial sector, and at the Foreign Policy Institute, I'll be making the case that Canada has leverage. We have strategic minerals, we have energy, we are the second biggest customer to the United States. It's in America's interest to have a strong tariff-free friendship with Canada, and so my mission here, of course, is to make Canada stronger at home, safer at home, more affordable at home, so that we can be unbreakable abroad. And I welcome your questions.
Mr. Poilievre, the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yes.
Why go on now and not during the campaign?
Well, the negotiations are coming up for the USMCA, or the CUSMA as we call it in Canada. I wanted to maximize Canadian leverage going in, and one of the biggest leverage points we have to fight for tariff-free trade, to fight for our auto, steel, aluminum, and lumber workers is the goodwill of the American people. So I use the podcast to argue in favor of removing those tariffs, not just because it's great for Canadian workers, but also because it'll make life more affordable for American consumers.
How do you think you did on the podcast?
I think we had a great conversation. Joe's a great guy, and my mission was very simple: fight for Canada. I presented him with a big maple leaf on his kettlebell, which you'll see every time he works out. He'll think of Canadian workers who did the artisanal craftsmanship on that beautiful piece of equipment, and it was a great chance to fight for removing tariffs, so that our people can have jobs and we can launch our economy from currently being the weakest in the G7 to being the strongest.
So the platform is of current interest to you because of tariffs, but in the past you've called the Joe Rogan podcast problematic. So
No,
why would you do it?
I haven't done that.
Would you do it again?
I don't see why not.
You enjoyed his company?
So,
You enjoyed his company?
I thought we had a great conversation about how the United States would be best served by eliminating all the tariffs, so that we can make life safer and more affordable for Americans, and make paychecks bigger and our economy stronger for Canadians. So that's my message. I'm here to fight for Canada, to fight for our workers, our jobs, our steel, our aluminum, our lumber, our autos, and what better place to do it than on the biggest podcast in the world.
So what do you have planned for the rest of your time in New York?
We're giving a speech to I'm giving a speech to the Foreign Policy Institute. Then I'm meeting with some major investors who, some of them have already pre-existing links to Canada, and I'll be making the argument to them they should be investing in Canada. Plow your capital back into our country so we can build things on the north side of the border and profit both Americans and Canadians as friends.
So do you feel you have some repair work to do with the relationship between the two nations?
Unfortunately so. I mean, we've got these very unfortunate tariffs in place, but we've got to focus on what we can control, right? We can't control what the president says or does, but we can control how we react. And so my mission has been to make Canada stronger at home by unblocking our resources, unleashing our economy, building up our reserves of energy and minerals, and then using all that leverage to get tariff-free access to the American market. Thank you, sir. Great to be with you. Bonjour tout le monde. Anna et moi sommes très heureux d'être ici aux États-Unis pour une tournée afin de promouvoir nos travailleurs et nos intérêts. Le but, c'est d'utiliser le grand levier de bonne volonté qu'on partage avec le peuple américain pour éliminer les tarifs et rétablir le libre-échange entre nos deux pays. Le but, c'est de promouvoir des chèques de paie de Canada. On veut que le Canada soit abordable chez nous, sécuritaire chez nous, maître chez nous. Mon tournée a commencé à Détroit, où j'ai proposé l'idée de libre-échange d'un pacte d'automobiles pour permettre le libre-échange de nos autos à travers nos frontières. Après ça, je suis allé à Houston afin de parler de l'énergie canadienne. Le Texas est l'un des marchés les plus grands pour l'énergie canadienne. J'ai proposé l'augmentation de 2 millions de barils par jour de pétrole afin d'augmenter notre dollar canadien, notre PIB, les revenus pour la santé, l'éducation. Et les gens de Texas étaient très, très heureux d'entendre ce plan. Après ça, je suis allé à Austin, au capital, pour rencontrer le gouverneur Abbott. M. Abbott est un grand supporter de Canada. Il veut en faire davantage de commerce avec notre pays. Le Texas est l'un des plus grands marchés d'exportation au monde pour le Canada. Et il veut un plus grand partenariat avec nous sur l'énergie, la technologie et d'autres industries canadiennes et américaines. Après quoi, j'ai eu l'occasion d'aller aux grandes émissions de Joe Rogan, la plus grande émission de podcast au monde, pour faire les arguments en faveur de l'élimination des tarifs, de libre-échange entre nos deux pays et de rebâtir l'amitié. C'était une occasion exceptionnelle de parler au plus grand nombre d'Américains possible pour contrer les tarifs sur l'aluminium, le bois d'œuvre, l'acier, les automobiles, pour défendre les travailleurs au Canada. Et j'espère que ça va créer plus de leviers avec l'administration pour les négociations qui s'en viennent sur l'échange commercial entre nos deux pays qui vont être tenus pendant l'été. Finalement, je suis à New York avant de rencontrer le secteur financier qui touche tous les autres secteurs. C'est la bourse en arrière moi. Donc, on va parler de notre économie, la capacité de Canada de rendre les États-Unis plus abordables et plus sécuritaires, avec une relation plus intégrale, tout en protégeant notre souveraineté. Ça va être dans un grand discours ce soir. Alors, c'est un grand progrès. Encore, le but ici aux États-Unis, c'est de rendre le Canada plus abordable chez nous, plus sécuritaire chez nous et en fait, maître chez nous. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here now in English. It's great to be in the United States of America. I have been really enjoying the goodwill of Americans. Americans love Canada. That's the great news that I take away from this trip. Incredible goodwill on the south side of the border. They want trade with Canada. They want partnership with Canada. They want friendship with Canada, as we've done for well over 200 years now. And we started in Detroit, where I fought for our auto sector, pushing an auto pact that would allow free trade across our border and will not only protect the jobs that are at risk today, but double our production back to where it was back in 2015. And the auto sector on the American side of the border was very happy because of the plan that I put forward actually increases auto production for both Canada and the U.S. Then it was off to Houston, which is one of the great energy capitals of the world. Houston buys literally hundreds of millions of barrels of Canadian oil every single year. They don't just buy it, they transport it. Canadian oil goes by pipeline day after day, and I went to some of the terminals where our oil is received, processed, and shipped off to the world. The energy companies there were thrilled to hear my plan to boost production by a couple million barrels to make our country stronger, make our people better off, and make our dollar more powerful. so with life's affordable. I then went on to Austin, where I met with the governor of Texas, Governor Abbott. He wants to build even better trade relationships. Texas is one of the biggest export destinations for Canadian goods, and the Texas governor welcomed the idea of buying even more from Canada to support our economy. Then I was on to the Joe Rogan podcast, which is the biggest podcast in the world and the best place to sell Americans on the idea of tariff-free trade, to fight for our auto workers, our lumber workers, our steel and aluminum workers, and to fight for Canadian interests. We need to harness the goodwill of the American people, and what better place to do it than on the biggest podcast in the world, fighting for Canadian workers. Now on to New York, where I'll be speaking to the financial sector, and at the Foreign Policy Institute, I'll be making the case that Canada has leverage. We have strategic minerals, we have energy, we are the second biggest customer to the United States. It's in America's interest to have a strong tariff-free friendship with Canada. And so my mission here, of course, is to make Canada stronger at home, safer at home, more affordable at home, so that we can be unbreakable abroad. And I welcome your questions.
So we have the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yes.
Why go on now and not during the campaign?
Well, the negotiations are coming up for the USMCA, or the CUSMA as we call it in Canada. I wanted to maximize Canadian leverage going in, and one of the biggest leverage points we have to fight for tariff-free trade, to fight for our auto, steel, aluminum, and lumber workers is the goodwill of the American people. So I use the podcast to argue in favor of removing those tariffs, not just because it's great for Canadian workers, but also because it'll make life more affordable for American consumers.
How do you think you did on the podcast?
I think we had a great conversation. Joe's a great guy, and my mission was very simple: fight for Canada. I presented him with a big maple leaf on his kettlebell, which you'll see every time he works out. He'll think of Canadian workers who did the artisanal craftsmanship on that beautiful piece of equipment. And it was a great chance to fight for removing tariffs so that our people can have jobs and we can launch our economy from currently being the weakest in the G7 to being the strongest.
So the platform is of current interest to you because of tariffs, but in the past you've called the Joe Rogan podcast problematic. So
No,
why would you do it?
I haven't done that.
Would you do it again?
I don't see why not.
You enjoyed his company?
So,
You enjoyed his company?
I thought we had a great conversation about how, the United States would be best served by eliminating all the tariffs so that we can make life safer and more affordable for Americans and make paychecks bigger and our economy stronger for Canadians. So that's my message. I'm here to fight for Canada, to fight for our workers, our jobs, our steel, our aluminum, our lumber, our autos, and what better place to do it than on the biggest podcast in the world.
So what do you have planned for the rest of your time in New York?
We're giving a speech to I'm giving a speech to the Foreign Policy Institute. Then I'm meeting with some major investors who, some of them have already pre-existing links to Canada, and I'll be making the argument to them they should be investing in Canada. Plow your capital back into our country so that we can build things on the north side of the border and profit both Americans and Canadians as friends.
So do you feel you have some repair work to do with the relationship between the two nations?
Unfortunately so. I mean, we've got these very unfortunate tariffs in place, but we've got to focus on what we can control, right? We can't control what the president says or does, but we can control how we react. And so my mission has been to make Canada stronger at home by unblocking our resources, unleashing our economy, building up our reserves of energy and minerals, and then using all that leverage to get tariff-free access to the American market. Thank you, sir. Great to be with you.
about to sneeze. What good timing. What good timing. What a beautiful flag we have. Oh, what a beautiful flag you have. Oh, what a beautiful country. All right, so that is Pierre. He did his good thing. There is a major investment. I don't know about this, if it's major or not. I'm concerned it's not a big... I'm concerned it's a very small thing.
Great. Thank you very much for joining us. More resilient and less reliant than we were in the past. So as we procure things, we're going to use what's called the build, partner, buy strategy. Today is a very good example of the build part of the build, partner, buy. This is the weapon that met the requirements of the Army. This is the weapon that they wanted. This weapon is made here in Canada. And there's a whole bunch more things that I could say about why this procurement really is a flagship of example of what we are trying to do with procurement as we move into the future. Ultimately, what we want to do is bring 70% of the money we've been spending outside our border to inside our border to stimulate our own economy. And we want to increase our defense exports to 50%. And if we do both those things, which we're really going to try and do, and today's a good example of doing it, we expect to create an additional 125,000 jobs over 10 years in the defense and security space. So this is the plan. We're already executing, and let's get into why we're here today. The Canadian Armed Forces rely on a wide range of training and equipment. Each of these elements is important, but the assault rifle is arguably the most decisive and critical tool at a soldier's disposal. Our current C7, C8 assault rifles and carbines have been in service for 35 years. I did basic officer training with the FN, so I'm even older than the C7. They've served our troops well, but the time has come to replace them with a modern, dependable system. Today, I'm very pleased to announce that the Defence Investment Agency has awarded Colt Canada with a contract to supply the Canadian Armed Forces with up to 65,402 assault rifle systems under the Canadian Modular Assault Rifle Project. That is unbelievable. From a process side, this procurement was done using a risk-based approach, demonstrating the Defence Investment Agency's firm commitment to streamlining processes and accelerating delivery of equipment to the Canadian Armed Forces. In phase one of this project, 30,000 general service or GS variant rifles will be procured over a 3-year period. The estimated value of this initial phase is approximately $307 million. These firearms will provide reliable personal protection and deterrent for personnel who are not in primary combat roles. In year 4 of the project, phase 2, we'll see the remaining 19,000 general service rifles come online, along with over 16,000 full-spectrum or FS variant rifles. The later variant is designed for frontline combat roles. It is optimized for offensive operations in urban and open terrain, with advanced features for soldiers and regular infantry units. In addition to the rifle systems, the project also includes system integration and engineering support from Colt Canada. The contract will also deliver major economic benefits for Canada. Colt has committed to include 80% Canadian content within the rifle, creating new activity and jobs across the supply chain. I want to pause on that for a second because that is very, very important to the Government of Canada and to Canadians. The supply chain that feeds this facility really matters. So to bring everybody into the tent, if we can model this right across what we're trying to do in Canada, it'd be very, very helpful. I'm thrilled that Colt's putting this much effort into making sure the supply chain is Canadian. Thank you, Colt, for doing that. And as they say in the House of Commons, bonne nouvelle, it gets better. Colt Canada will also be growing its workforce from 130 to more than 200 employees to meet this need. So that's also very awesome. The contract will also generate nearly roughly $10 million in annual GDP over the next 5 years, including additional impact from the ITB policy. With expanded facilities and an increased production capacity, Colt Canada will be delivering more than 50,000 rifles to Denmark. That was in the press a little while ago, but you can see how when we invest in Canadian companies, it also increases their capacity and their ability to export to others. This is great. We also want to make sure that others that are looking for these amazing rifles, our allies, come to this facility and buy more from us here in Canada. This is a great example of how our investments in Canadian companies can help them scale and deliver for Canada and its allies. For many decades, Colt Canada supplied Canada's armed forces and law enforcement agencies with small arms. I want to thank each of you here at Colt Canada for the difference you're making and contributing to the readiness of Canada's military. Providing modern, reliable equipment to the men and women who serve is the DIA's central mission. By investing in advanced systems and Canadian expertise, our partnership with Colt Canada creates good-paying jobs, strengthens our economy, and keeps our forces ready for the challenges ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Secretary of State Pierre, for that fantastic announcement. At this time, I'd like to welcome to the stage the Defence Minister, Minister McGuinty.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. Thank you very much for allowing me to join you here today. It's great to be here with my colleague Stephen Fuhr, who's doing an exceptional job. It's standing up a whole new organization, as we've heard, in terms of how we buy things. And it's going to be big, it's going to be beautiful. It's going to be good. It's going to be huge. I also want to recognize Tim and thank him for being here, the Member of Parliament from Kitchener-Conestoga, and Bardish Chagger, my colleague and good friend, Member of Parliament for Waterloo. And I also want to take a second to acknowledge and thank Karen Redmond. Karen is the chair of the region of Waterloo. She was an outstanding public servant, elected for a long time, Member of Parliament for Kitchener Centre. It's so good to see you again, Karen. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much. And thank you to Sean Congdon, CEO of Colt Canada, and the entire team, all of you, for being here today and welcoming us. This company has a long and proud history of supporting the Canadian Armed Forces. And we're going to need you at your best as we move forward. You're one of 5 Canadian suppliers under the Munitions Supply Program, and you play a critical role in ensuring our military has a reliable supply of small arms, equipment they depend on every day to carry out their missions. Just yesterday, I was in Ingersoll to announce a new ammunition facility at IMT Precision, a big announcement. And tomorrow I'm in Quebec to launch an even bigger announcement on a major nitrocellulose investment. We are moving at a speed we haven't seen in a long time. Taken together, those investments and the one we're making today are going to strengthen our capacity under the Munitions Supply Program and ensure the CAF have the resources they need when they need them. So I'm proud to be here, continuing that work in partnership with industry to announce this important new investment, building precisely on what Steve just said, what he outlined in detail for us. Maybe a few minutes on the context within which we're operating today. This is a moment of very, very profound change. It cannot be understated. A moment where the world is shifting in ways that are faster, more complex, more uncertain than we've seen in decades. The global security environment we once relied on is no longer fixed. It's being reshaped in real time. As the Prime Minister likes to say, we're witnessing a true rupture, a break from the assumptions and the stability that define the past. Assumptions like our geography is going to protect us, because it won't. At the same time, new and emerging technologies across both traditional and non-traditional domains are transforming the nature of threats and how they evolve. This is not a return to the old world. It's something fundamentally different. And in the face of that reality, we better be very clear-eyed and resolute about it. We've got to do more to ensure that the CAF have the equipment and the capabilities they need to meet these challenges head-on. Canada's got to be ready to defend its vast and resource-rich territory. And we must remain a reliable and capable partner, standing with our NATO allies, yes, and with our American neighbors, and stepping up when it matters most. So to meet the increased demands of our military, as Steve mentioned, we launched Canada's first ever Defence Industrial Strategy, the DIS, last month. We canvassed over 2,000 businesses. We spoke to 17 other countries who have similar strategies and asked them what worked, what didn't work, what do we have to do to get this right. So through that strategy, we're making generational investments in Canada's industrial capabilities. $6.6 billion pledged over 5 years to prioritize domestic, here, at home, defense production. The objectives outlined in the strategy are ambitious, we'll admit it, but they're realistic in light of the billions of dollars committed to defense in the coming years. By 2035, this country will be spending a total of $450 billion on defense. In the next 9 years, the single largest investment in defense in Canadian history. We can do it. At the end of the Second World War, we had the third largest air force in the world. We had the fourth largest Navy. So through the strategy, we're making these investments. They're ambitious. By 2035, we expect to increase total Canadian defense industry revenues by 240%, generate more than 125,000 new jobs, increase the share of defense acquisitions awarded to Canadian firms to 70%. This is what it's all about. We also anticipate boosting defense research and development by 85% and raising Canadian defense exports by 50%. All of this is putting Canada on a pathway to meet NATO's new defense investment pledge. We pledge to meet 2% by March 31st. Stay tuned. Not far away. Good news is coming. But we've also said we're investing 5% of our GDP annually in defense and security by 2035. And crucially, we're ensuring we're delivering much-needed capabilities for our people in uniform while injecting billions of dollars into our economy. In fact, every dollar that we do invest to rebuild, to rearm, to reinvest in our military is a dollar invested in Canadian workers, in our communities, in our economy, and in our sovereignty, in our security. This means taking a strategic approach to procurement, as we heard from Steve, one that prioritizes long-term partnerships with Canadian industry, because industry has to know how big is the ask, how big is the order, how long will this last, if I'm going to staff up, if I'm going to equip up, if I'm going to engineer, what's coming at us and for how long. We're sending a clear and consistent signal to the private sector. To large firms, yes, but to small and medium-sized businesses everywhere, that Canada is open for defense business and we're ready to invest here at home. We'll no longer rely on outsourcing the majority of our defense production or depend on foreign suppliers for core capabilities. Instead, we're rebuilding it here, our own defense industrial base, on top of the 600 companies like Colt that we already have, made by Canadians for Canadian soldiers, prioritizing Canadian expertise, investing in Canadian capacity, research, development, engineering, buying Canadian, because that's how we ensure our armed forces have the right equipment when they need it for the long term. That's what this is about today. It's a wonderful example of the acquisition of all these new assault rifles that Stephen mentioned, while building in the flexibility to scale and adapt over time as operational needs evolve. This investment directly supports the designation of munitions as a core, quote, sovereign capability. That really means, in plain English, what we need, what we can build, what we can devise for ourselves. Because a sovereign munitions capability is about more than supply. It's about being autonomous for ourselves. It's really about standing on our own 2 feet. As I like to say, we can compete and we can win, and we will. It ensures our armed forces have the tools they need to defend Canada while driving that economic growth right here in Kitchener. For more than 45 years, the C7 and C8 served our armed forces with distinction across missions, terrains, climates around the world. Today we're building on that legacy. You are building on that legacy, ensuring the next generation of equipment meets the demands of a rapidly changing world. The new GS full-spectrum rifles will deliver over 40 years of technological evolution to our soldiers, bringing the best of Canadian know-how and engineering. So as we're seeing today, Canada's Defence Investment Agency represents a critical step. Steve's got a big job. He's got to go out there, ferret through the suppliers, set the conditions, make the hard choices, receive the tenders, and execute. And we're doing it at a speed and a pace, to be honest, that some folks are having a hard time keeping up with. So be it. But we can't do this alone. Our defence industry is an essential partner in safeguarding Canada's security. We're going to continue to rely on you, every single one of you who work here on the floor. I hope you remember that your role here is important. You're part of something much larger, very important for our country. We are 41 million strong. It is elbows up. We are looking out for ourselves. We can win, we can compete, and we're relying on you to strengthen our self-reliance, expand our capabilities, ensure that our CAF, the women and men of the Canadian Armed Forces, have what they need to meet any challenge coming at them. So on behalf of the Government of Canada and the people of Canada, for those of you involved in this enterprise, thank you. Thank you for the heavy lifting. Thanks for the commitment. Thanks for the overtime. This is something bigger than all of us. What you do here in Kitchener matters, and it matters a great deal. It matters to our national security, it matters to our sovereignty, and it matters to our credibility with our allies. So let's keep moving forward together towards a stronger, more secure, and more prosperous Canada. And let's not forget, we can compete, we can win, and we will win. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. I also am remiss in
Well, there you go. We got C7's new ones from Kitchener Colt. Kitchener Colt plant. That's a big announcement. Yesterday, Ingersoll in Ontario, the defense minister, he was announcing the artillery shells increase, and the day before, NATO's Space Shield, its initiative with MP Suds as well, over something that with also CANSO. That's about a $200 million CANSO launch lease. So they get basically leasing out the CANSO thing. So that's like Canada's only commercial space launch facility, and also that is now coupled with the government, which is cool that to see a government not be like partner after, you know what I mean, for something that's such as vital as space. Like it's a big deal. Space is a big deal. It's basically everything for all the internet, all the connections. It's all going to be space connections. And whoever controls that level is basically controls the next level of humanity, right? The new age, the age of air. That was okay. So there we go. There, Pierre, he spoke for a few minutes. He's gonna speak for 3 hours on Rogan. Here, I'll check to see, is it on Rogan right now? Is it up? Is it up? It's 11:30. Oh, could you indulge in a little bit of Rogan at 11:30 a.m.? Oh, it'd be a little bit. That'd be a 2-hour indulging of TV at noon. Oh, I don't know. That's that right off that day. No. I got some Brigham Bueller's day off. Brigham Young. There you go. Oh, you leading. Yeah, I had some pretty interesting ones lately. So there you go. Not yet. So I don't know what the lead time or delay time is for when taping to production and right. But I think I imagine it's fairly quick. I don't know. We'll see. Watch, it's like one of the lost. It becomes the lost episode. It was like, yeah, he even announced, he went to New York, he even announced that we knew there was an episode, and it never shows up. The lost episode. Something funny like that. Foreign Affairs Minister is in London. She's London calling, and Chatham House. Well, she's Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand has a very big business background, in a different way of saying she's rich. She made a lot of money in business. We had a lot of that going on, and then so that's how part of the reason she gets a lot of extra
on and we always need to say to America, we got your back. Like,
she went to Chatham House in London doing a bunch of stuff.
Well, thank you so much for that warm introduction, and thank you everyone for taking time out of your day to be here this afternoon. C'est un grand plaisir de vous voir, comme toujours, et aussi je voudrais mentionner au début de le discours ici that we are joined by our new High Commissioner to the UK, the Honourable William Sterling Blair. He's sitting. Do you want to stand up, Bill? This is our new High Commissioner. And you may sense the affection in my voice. Minister Blair and I have served in cabinet together in Canada for several years, and it's an absolute honor now to be here with you under your leadership here in the UK. So thank you so much for your service to our country. I also wanted to just state the obvious to begin, which is we are in a profound moment of geopolitical challenge and change, with the global economy being completely upended and the world trading order being rewired. And this is the moment that I would say, are fortunate enough to have this conversation and indeed an analysis of foreign policy generally speaking. And on that note, perhaps I will begin with a discussion of Prime Minister Carney's speech at Davos. And let's just say, everywhere I go as foreign minister, every country, every room, every foreign minister I speak with The conversation begins with Prime Minister Carney's speech at Davos. And some people call it the speech, the Carney speech, the remarks at Davos, the Carney doctrine. There are many ways we can refer to the remarks he made. On the way home, I said to the Prime Minister, now that this doctrine has been stated, the work falls on me and us, but me as Foreign Minister, to implement it. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Comment est-ce qu'on peut mettre en œuvre le discours, les affaires étrangères pour le Canada, mais pas seulement pour notre pays, pour le monde entier? How do we implement this doctrine now that is so important, that is gaining so much traction all over the world? And we'll come back to that question of traction towards the end of my remarks. And in particular, I want to start with the actual substance of the doctrine itself. And the substance of the doctrine is based in the principle, if you will, of principles imbued with pragmatism, or principled pragmatism. As I was leaving the speech at Davos, I saw Alexander Stubb across the way, and I was waving to him, and he said, "Values-based realism." And then we went our separate ways. And back to our trip on the way home, it was values-based realism that we talked about, variable geometry, the rules-based international order, multilateralism. But I said to the Prime Minister, these are not the terms that Canadians regularly speak in when they meet for coffee at Tim Hortons. And how do we make our foreign policy understandable to Canadians while we are implementing it? And that's what I want to talk to you about today, making this foreign policy not only understandable, but able to be implemented in an era of geopolitical challenge and change. And so let's talk about that. How do you make principled pragmatism real on the international stage? This is the work that Prime Minister Carney and I and our government are doing every single day. And we'll begin, given that you're a group of trade experts in the room, let's begin on the economic front. Let's begin in particular by talking about the work we are doing to double non-US trade over the next 10 years. And that work is proceeding with alacrity. In particular, you will note that Canada has signed more than 12 trade agreements across 4 continents in the past 6 months. This includes trade agreements with Indonesia, commitments with India for a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, the signing of an FTA with ASEAN in 2026, negotiations with the Philippines, Cambodia, and Mercosur, and the list goes on. So on the economic front, our work is proceeding very quickly. And in fact, this is a strategy that I discussed with Prime Minister Carney before he was Prime Minister Carney. In fact, back in January 2025, this was his vision, and certainly diversification of trading relationships was clearly on our agenda. But even before 2025, Canada was the only G7 country that had a free trade agreement with every other G7 country. That continues to be the case. And we are layering on top bilateral and multilateral trade agreements on this foundation of diversification in trade. And we can talk in the questions about the advantages of this strategy, but certainly make no mistake, that is our strategy on the economic front. In order to grow the domestic economy, we are not only pursuing a trade diversification strategy, but we've also identified 10 national projects that will proceed immediately. We have a national projects office that is responsible for coordinating the approvals, et cetera, in order to fast track these national projects. And they include SMR facility at Darlington. It includes wind projects, LNG, and the list goes on. So we'll be happy to talk about the economic track of implementing the Carney Doctrine. Let's move briefly to talk about the defense and security track of the Carney Doctrine. And in particular, this means that internationally we'll coordinate not only in terms of our traditional alliances. NATO stands as the primary example. Canada's a founding member of NATO, but layering on top of that multilateral organization additional pragmatic alliances that serve our domestic interests and the global principles and values that we have stood for over decades and decades. Those include territorial integrity, state sovereignty, and the international rules-based order, which, while under threat, continue to be important. And so we've got a clear example in terms of defense and security track of the Davos speech in the Coalition of the Willing for Ukraine. Canada bilaterally has put on the table $25.5 billion, and Minister Blair, as he was then as the Minister of National Defense, and I before him in that role, were leading very much the charge in terms of that bilateral relationship between Canada and Ukraine. But it's not enough for the support that Ukraine needs for there to be bilateral efforts alone. And so the Coalition of the Willing's work is extremely important in terms of continuing to be unified and shoring up the support that Ukraine needs in order to preserve its sovereignty and its territorial integrity, and I hope we'll talk about that. Another example is on Arctic security and sovereignty. Canada's key priority, both domestically and internationally, is to protect and defend the Arctic as Russian infrastructure moves further and further north towards the Arctic Circle. And Canada actually has 40% of our landmass and 70% of our coastline interfacing with the Arctic. And Prime Minister Carney's trip to Norway recently is an example of the way pragmatism works in this space. All of those countries, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Iceland, and Canada, and Finland, care and need to work together on Arctic security. It's not just a Canadian interest, it's a multilateral interest. And this coalescence, if you will, around a particular issue is the example of pragmatism in action. It's an example of the Carney Doctrine in action. Prior to that, I formally opened a consulate in Nuuk, Greenland. One of the most poignant moments of my professional life was raising the Canadian flag at the Canadian consulate in Nuuk. because it was at that moment in time that we needed to explicitly stand for those principles that I mentioned earlier, territorial integrity and state sovereignty. And it is in that moment that I actually felt the importance of not only Canada standing for principles, but Canada standing together with other like-minded countries for those principles. And so in the Davos speech, the Prime Minister spoke about middle powers coalescing. I tend to use the term like-minded powers, given that one or another country may or may not see themselves as a middle power, but that should not detract from the shared values and intentionality that we have. And so it is with our work on the international stage, we will continue to work together with like-minded countries in order to pursue values, whether it's in the economic sphere or whether it's in the defense and security sphere itself. Now, I'd like to turn to the Canada-UK relationship for a moment, and that is simply to say that Canada and the UK are natural partners. The UK is Canada's third largest single country trading partner for goods and services in 2025. It is much more than a trading partner, however. Shared values, deep historical roots, members of the Commonwealth, and true partners. And when I was having breakfast this morning with Secretary Lamy and Vice Prime Minister, of course, Deputy Prime Minister, I said very few countries can sit across the table from each other like we are today and build on a very strong foundation in order to further the bilateral relationship and the work we are doing together around the world. That relationship is so important in these moments of challenge and change. And so let me simply conclude by saying, through all of this work, all of these moments where we are responding pragmatically, let us not forget the principles that are driving this work and that will continue to inform and be present in this pragmatism. Canada's respect for human rights, for international law, for reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, for environmental sustainability, for gender equality, and the list goes on. Our principles are not absent. They are present more than ever, and they will be reflected in our pragmatic policy. This is the moment where we need to ensure, as Prime Minister Carney mentioned in his speech, that we stand for our principles and we do so individually and collectively with our work together with like-minded countries. And I'll close by saying that a country's greatness lies not only in delivering and in the pursuit of excellence for the domestic, economic, and security resilience towards which it strives, but also in the leadership that it plays internationally in pursuing objectives that benefit the global community writ large. This is Canada's mission. This is our moment to lead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. And I've spoken with many Canadian colleagues, friends, experts who also remind me that the Davos speech was not the beginning of this initiative, but in fact has been a project Canada has had for many years now and is accelerating in much more public and consolidated ways.
Consistent with what you've heard. That's
Absolutely.
always a good thing.
Absolutely. But one of the questions that I've been getting is, in this vision, it's a broad vision of middle powers, of like-minded partners, as you say. In your view, who are those most critical partners? Are there specific countries or institutions or regions that animate this strategy for you, or is it a variable geometry, bespoke depending on the topic or the issue, that will then pull together specific countries and institutions in service of that aim?
So the key to that, to answering that question, lies in the word pragmatism. Mm-hmm. Pragmatism is reflective of decisions that are made as necessity calls for, given the situation.
Yes.
And you can see that in the work that the Prime Minister Carney is doing with the Nordic Five. And indeed, last August, I was in Finland saying to the Nordic Five, secured an invitation to Finland to go to talk to them about the importance of Arctic security for all of us. And indeed, since that meeting with the Nordic Five, I have then taken up the conversation with Mark Rutte at NATO to say this needs to be a priority for NATO as well, not only member countries of NATO individually. So to answer your question, it depends on the issue, and different alliances will form given the particular issue at stake. Arctic security is a good example. Another example, a little bit more geographically afar, is on information technology and AI. On the sidelines of the G20 summit in South Africa, Prime Minister Carney, Prime Minister Albanese, and Prime Minister Modi decided to strike what is called the ACITI, agreement between the three countries on information technology and data sharing. This is fundamentally an example of the Carney Doctrine in action. Our domestic interests and international objectives would be served by moving towards an agreement that was voiced in an MOU at the time towards reaching a particular goal vis-a-vis information technology. And so we're going to, right now, on the sidelines of the G20, we're going to sign a document. Didn't go through the whole system of bureaucratic red lines and changes and back and forth that you see and have traditionally seen in diplomacy. It was very much leader level driven. And that's just another example of the pragmatism at stake that Canada is exemplifying.
And so to take this example of AI and emerging technology, there's such significant promise, but also a lot of risk involved. Major players in the US, in China, several in Europe as well. How is Canada thinking about its approach to sovereign AI, where the opportunities are, and then what are the risks you are trying to guard against?
Well, of course, Canada is a leader in artificial intelligence. Geoffrey Hinton and others have led the charge from a Canadian perspective across universities and think tanks within our country. And so we have a Minister of Artificial Intelligence, the first such minister in Canadian history, and we are pursuing aggressively a policy of ensuring that AI is at the forefront of not only our policy relating to tech, but also our economic policy, our energy policy, and our work internationally. So yes, sovereign AI is at the very forefront of Canadian policy, but I should say, across any of these subjects we're talking about today, We can no longer think in silos when it comes to the discharge of ministerial obligations, but also our domestic and foreign policy. Security and defense is tied very closely to economic policy, which is tied very closely to our energy policy, which in turn is tied very closely to our work with AI and tech. It is a puzzle that needs to be kept closely together, and if we think in silos, we will not be as successful as we need to be.
You raised energy, and if the Carney Doctrine is in service of coalescing around a problem, energy is a problem this month in very acute ways as a result of the U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran. How does the Carney Doctrine apply on energy? How is Canada thinking about diversifying its partnerships in trade relations beyond the U.S. and the hydrocarbon space? What does this doctrine say on the energy space, both in the near term, how it addresses skyrocketing oil and gas prices and the Iran conflict, but then longer term, what it looks like for blooming demand as AI build-out continues?
So every country I visit, without exception, asks me about Canada's energy and critical mineral resources, period.
We didn't disappoint you here, I hope.
And the reality is that Canada's an energy superpower. And this was the case historically, not just since the unfortunate, and I would say illegal, closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And what we are doing with countries around the world now, and this is another example of pragmatic and principled foreign policy, is to say, how can we cooperate with you on energy and critical minerals? And the Prime Minister, in fact, at the G7 in Kananaskis, led the work that was signed on by the G7 to stabilize supply chains in critical minerals, to ensure that there is collaborative work that is occurring given the volatility in the supply chain for critical minerals. And on energy, listen, name your source of energy, that is. LNG, clean and conventional across the board. Nuclear, I mentioned Darlington, but of course, Canada is well known for the CANDU nuclear reactors. I've just come from Turkey, for example. We have such reactors present all over the world, including next door to Turkey and Romania. Wind power, solar power, and this is Canada's moment, indeed, to continue to lead in the area of energy in all its forms.
And what we heard in Davos was also a very pointed set of remarks about the United States, right? About the kind of causes or some of the intervening events over the last year plus that have animated this strategy and accelerated it, and indeed broadened its appeal to other middle powers or like-minded countries. What is that relationship with the U.S. right now? Where are the areas of ongoing cooperation? What are the risks you're seeing over the next years?
That's a really nuanced question, and I appreciate that framing, because the relationship is complex and spans a number of areas, not only trade, and 85% of our trade passes through the USMCA, tariff-free. And I'll come back to trade in a minute, but trade, defense and security, under NORAD, the Canada and the United States together defend the North American continent, including the Canadian Arctic. People-to-people ties, so great. I say this as I, reference some of my own family who live and work in the United States. This is commonplace for there to be high integration between the populations of both countries. And so across these many areas, you see a very integrated relationship. And it's really impossible to disentangle the relationship. And so in this moment where we see the world trading order being rewired, what Canada is doing is saying we have our own distinct path. And we are charting that path to double non-U.S. trade over 10 years. And we are moving quickly in order to do so. We are ensuring as well that we're removing internal barriers to trade. You know that we are a country of 13 provincial and territorial jurisdictions. Well, there has to be free trade within our country, not only with other countries around the world. And so this is a very nuanced relationship, but we have, without question, charted a course in furtherance of Canada's domestic economic resilience.
And how does this strategy, where does China fit in this strategy? How is Canada thinking about, my read of this doctrine was that it was, it was all of the countries except the U.S. and except China, right? But surely these middle powers, Canada, have very deep ties to the United States, have growing ties to China. Can you speak a bit about how you are seeing your country's evolving approach to China and how middle powers might feed into that, and what the limits of those partnerships and the risks are there too?
Another great question. So the work I'm doing as foreign minister is to ensure that we have diplomatic relationships with countries around the world, especially where there is mutual economic benefit to be had. And in the case of China, for legitimate reasons, there had been a lessening or loosening of the relationship, despite the fact that China is our second largest trading partner. And the trade frictions between our countries had grown, especially after we followed the United States lead and imposed 100% tariffs on Chinese EV. And they retaliated with tariffs on our canola and other industries. And so I went to China and India, in fact, in October to begin the conversation about how do we address these trade frictions and how do we chart a path forward that respects concerns that we naturally have in the relationship, but also that addresses some of the economic friction that have been deeply and negatively affecting certain Canadian sectors. We are a country of agricultural producers, for example, and our agri-food industry had been very heavily hit by those retaliatory or those tariffs by China. And so what we were able to do, Prime Minister Carney's visit to see President Xi in January was a mark of pragmatically addressing the issues, ensuring that those trade frictions were resolved, and also, as you said in the last part of your question, allowing the people-to-people ties that are strong between our two countries to grow, with China agreeing to allow visa-free travel for Canadian citizens to China. So that's the example of nuanced foreign policy that addresses particular issues in the bilateral relationship in a way that benefits the Canadian economy.
I have many more questions for you, but I know the audience does too. So I will stop there for now. As you ask your question, we will have microphones come to you. You can remain seated. Please state your name and your affiliation and ensure your question is indeed a question. In the back.
Hello, Minister. I'm Emily Lydgate from the UK Trade Policy Observatory. So picking up on the point about kind of internal political tensions in Canada, as I'm sure you know, the UK and Canada suspended negotiations towards their free trade agreement comprehensive update in 2024, largely because of agricultural market access concerns. So I'm curious if in the wake of the Davos speech, there's a fresh impetus of energy towards making progress in this realm. And if not, is that a failure of middle power cooperation? How can we contextualize that?
Yes, there is all work being done to ensure that we can move even closer together as trading partners and partners on many other issues. It is in keeping with our bilateral relationship.
Well, that question was in the weeds and then through the pond into the wetlands. That was definitely a good question. Tough one. And definitely was like, whoo! She's like, thank God that's, I'll give them that. Now it's AI. Okay, so I'm going to, we are going to call it there. That is what the heck is going on today in Canada. No, in the world, basically. So what do we got? Iran. The Israelis went a little bit ballistic, and Iran, attacked back. It's conventional. This is a straightforward conventional warfare going on. The natural gas fields, folks. It's if you want to hype them up, it's the biggest in the world. It is the biggest in the world. It's the power. Havana is coming online very quickly. They're still throwing the rhetoric and stuff, but it has to do. They're going online because they're power. The power. So if the power gets shut out in Iran, well, woo, there on top of the internet, no power, no water. That means or water problems. Sewage problems, right? Because you need lift stations to get it to the sewage plants. Because flows downhill, right? And water flows, only with pumps that are power. It's not all gravity fed. It's not you're not all down the river. So they got all this stuff going on in the world. Iran is. The Qatari side, though, now that's a more different story. Now that they have not, they also for power generation and stuff. So it looks to be that they hit the red line, and Trump called it. He's that and they're and so that's as far as it goes. It seems, unless something happens, but I don't think anyone really on that side wants to see their, nation go. So it seems that we don't know. It reminds me of Wheel of Fortune. Remember that wheel? You spin that wheel, and it's wherever that wheel is going to last is where finally the leaders are going to end. Because it's like one after another. Okay, a new leader guy you hear about for the first time is eliminated. You're like, oh my gosh. Another guy, the third, the fourth, another, is he in the hospital? Who knows? There's all kinds. I just think They just want to make it as easy as possible, just like Venezuela. You don't want to have to pick the leaders, like pick them yourself. But I don't think they want to hear anymore. They will not. I don't think the Americans will, under Trump at least, will accept someone creating protests. But they aren't protests; they're rallies, or whatever, national rallies that they're chanting "Death to America," and then actively working, killing, and then working against the business of America, worldwide. That just is not in a large, huge way. I couldn't believe it. What happened for so long? It took it's taking, but it definitely is this little strait there. I don't understand why the Europeans are so slow at it. They should have been all over it more. Well, as Australia and Japan as well. Japan with their laws, get their ships there, see what they can do. This Hormuz Strait, you know what I mean? It seems as most likely it's going to be need to be managed with lots of people and lots of boats and stuff like that. Most likely drones and drone bases, I think, is going to be the answer. I don't know how fast they're going to be able to build them, but there's drone ships, and then there's all kinds of old conventional shit that they should be throwing out there, from all the NATO ships and Japanese and Australia. I think it would. It makes sense. I know it would be expensive mission. But if your country's getting your oil from there, it kind of makes sense. And him inviting China was actually brilliant. If China would go, that would actually be a masterstroke. But that doesn't look to be that they're picking up on it very quickly. It'd be great because they get 90% of their oil from this strait. What the heck, America doesn't get any. America should be just okay. We won't bother. That's why the thing about the Europeans is really odd. But we'll see. I think just as what it is they're getting ready, and it's just rhetoric, and it takes time to do these things, and especially if these militaries haven't done them in a long time, it's going to be, it's going to be a show. Just don't talk about how bad it's going. But it's rolling anyway. It's rolling forward. We're bringing the ship. It'll be there in about 13 months. It's just not ready to handle small, medium-sized, fast boats coming at our ship or drones or whatever. Anyway, or even get there maybe in some cases. It's a pretty far distance, It's a big, it's the feet that it goes on, They may not, they got to go through some pretty hefty waters. Anyway, so this is what we got going on today. I got no comment. We got things. Oh, what do we got here? Waka waka waka. What do we got? What's that name there? Wilson. Mr. Wilson of the fence? Yeah, nice fence would be nice. All right. There is a limited supply. All right. Thanks for watching.
this bank is a means by which we will mold our domestic, economic, and defense and security objectives with the overall view that we have internationally, that we can work more strongly in a coordinated fashion internationally than we can alone.
We have unfortunately come to the end of our time together today, but you have given us so much to think about and many different threads to watch.